When I was younger, I never imagined the sound of silence could hurt so much. There was a time when my house was filled with laughter, the steady hum of the washing machine, the smell of fresh bread baking, and my son's voice calling, "Mom, where's my backpack?" My name is Evelyn Carter, and I used to believe love was simple, that if you gave your whole heart, it would always come back to you, maybe not quickly, but faithfully. I was wrong. For most of my life, everything revolved around one person, my son, Daniel. After his father, Michael, passed away when Daniel was just 11, the world suddenly felt enormous and cruel. I had two choices, crumble or fight. So I fought. I worked double shifts as a diner waitress during the day, cleaned offices at night, and somehow still found the strength to pack Daniel's lunch and check his homework before bed. People in town used to tell me, "Evelyn, you're doing too much." But they didn't understand, he was my everything. Every extra dollar I made went straight into Daniel's future, his clothes, his books, his dream of college. I used to whisper at night, "God, just let me see him become the man I believe he can be." And he did. Daniel grew into a smart, confident young man, the kind who made people believe in him instantly. He was the first in our family to go to college. When he got his acceptance letter, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried like a child. We didn't have much, but I threw a small celebration. A few paper streamers, a cheap cake from the grocery store, and his favorite meal, spaghetti with too much cheese. I remember him laughing, his brown hair falling into his eyes. "You didn't have to go all out, Mom," he said. But to me, there was nothing all out about love. After college, he got a job in another city. At first, we talked every day. Then every week. Then, not so much. The silences between our calls started stretching longer and longer. I told myself it was natural, he was busy, building his life. But every time my phone stayed quiet, the house felt emptier. Then, one spring afternoon, Daniel called. His voice was excited, almost boyish again. "Mom, I met someone." Her name was Olivia. He told me she worked in marketing, had this infectious energy, and that she made him feel alive. I could hear it in his voice, he was in love. When I finally met her, I wanted to love her too. She was beautiful, tall, polished, and spoke with the kind of confidence you get from never worrying about money. She smiled at me, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. She called me Mrs. Carter even after I told her to just call me Evelyn. I tried to ignore the distance. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe she just needed time. After the wedding, I thought things would get better. Instead, they got quieter. Months passed before I saw them again. Daniel would call, always in a hurry. "Mom, we'll visit soon." But soon turned into seasons. And when he did visit, it was never quite the same. He seemed distracted, always checking his phone, laughing at messages that weren't mine. Olivia barely spoke, and when she did, it was about vacations, renovations, or how her mother, Margaret, thought Daniel was such a wonderful provider. I used to smile politely, but inside, I felt like I was watching my son slip away inch by inch. Then one evening, Daniel came by alone. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to teach him how to count coins. He looked nervous. "Mom, things are a little tight right now," he said. "Just until I get a bonus from work. I might need a little help." Before he could even finish, I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You don't even have to ask, sweetheart." That night, I logged into my online banking and added him as a joint user. It wasn't a fortune, just my life savings, The money I'd tucked away for emergencies and for when I'd be too old to work. But in my heart, it didn't feel like giving. It felt like loving. If only I knew what he'd do next. A month later, I went to withdraw a few $100s to pay my property tax. The teller gave me a strange look. "Ma'am, it looks like the balance is zero." I blinked. "That's not possible. Can you check again?" She turned the monitor toward me, and I saw it, transaction after transaction, withdrawal after withdrawal. All of it to Daniel's account. My hands went cold. My voice trembled when I asked, "Are you sure this isn't a mistake?" She shook her head softly. "I'm sorry." I walked home in a daze. The spring breeze felt sharp, cruel. That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the same spot where he'd held my hand. I dialed his number, no answer. I called again. And again. Finally, Olivia picked up. "Hi, Mrs. Carter," she said, her tone as cool as glass. "Where's Daniel?" "He's traveling," she replied. "Traveling?" I repeated. "With what money?" There was a pause. Then the line went dead. The next morning, a neighbor showed me something that made my stomach drop. On social media, a photo of Daniel and Olivia, smiling under palm trees, drinks in hand, her mother Margaret right beside them. The caption read, "Family vacation in Hawaii, finally living the dream." The dream. Yes. Paid for by his mother's lifetime of work. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in the living room as the clock ticked and ticked and ticked. I thought of the lunches I skipped to save money for his books. The winters I went without heat so he could have new shoes. The nights I walked home in the dark, whispering prayers that he'd have a better life. And this was the life he chose. It wasn't anger that filled me, it was something quieter. Heavier. Betrayal doesn't always sound like shouting. Sometimes it's just silence, the kind that follows a lifetime of love. For days, I moved through my house like a ghost. I watered the plants, swept the porch, cooked meals I couldn't eat. Every sound felt hollow, even the hum of the refrigerator seemed cruel. But then, on the third night, something inside me shifted. I realized I had two choices, to remain broken, or to rebuild quietly. If my son could use my love for his gain, then I would use my pain for his lesson. But my revenge wouldn't come from anger. It would come from understanding. From wisdom. From the very patience he had taken for weakness. He took my money. But I still had something he didn't. Time, truth, and the calm strength of a mother who's been through the fire and come out unburned. That night, I whispered to myself. Let's see, Daniel. Let's see what you truly value. The storm had begun to form. And this time, I wasn't afraid of the thunder. Morning came quietly that week, as if the world itself was holding its breath around me. The sun rose over the faded curtains, spilling light across a kitchen that used to feel warm but now looked hollow. I sat at the same table where Daniel once drew pictures as a little boy, messy crayons, crooked suns, smiling stick figures holding hands. Back then, everything he made was a love letter, even if he didn't know it. Now, the table was just wood. Cold, empty wood. The bank account was gone. The savings I'd built over 20 years, gone. But money wasn't the wound. It was the realization that my son, my only son, had become someone I no longer recognized. For a few days, I kept checking my phone. Part of me still believed he'd call, that maybe there was an explanation, maybe Olivia made him do it, maybe, something. But the phone stayed silent. The kind of silence that doesn't just sit in a room, it moves into your chest, makes a home inside your ribs. On the fourth morning, I turned off my phone completely. If he needed me, he would come. But deep down, I already knew he wouldn't. So I decided to move differently. I started working again, small things, odd jobs. I baked pies for the church fair, helped Mrs. Turner down the street with her grocery runs, and mended old clothes for the neighborhood kids. Every coin I earned, I put into a new jar I kept in the cupboard. Not a bank account. Not something Daniel could touch. Just a jar, a simple, safe place. Every night, when I dropped a few bills inside, I whispered, "This one's for me." It felt strange at first, caring for myself again. For years, every thought I had revolved around Daniel, what he needed, what he wanted, what might make him proud. Now I began learning something new, what made me feel alive. I painted the porch white. I planted new flowers in the front yard, bright marigolds and lavender, my mother's favorites. And for the first time in years, I listened to music while cooking. Small things, yes, but they stitched my spirit back together, one quiet thread at a time. One afternoon, I went into town to deliver pies for a fundraiser. That's when I ran into Margaret, Olivia's mother. She was standing outside the boutique, wearing designer sunglasses and holding a latte like she owned the world. When she saw me, her smile faltered, that fake, polite kind of smile that people wear when they know they've done you wrong. "Well, if it isn't Evelyn," she said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "How have you been?" "It's been ages." I forced a small smile. "I'm doing fine, Margaret." "And you?" "Oh, just wonderful," she said. "We just got back from Europe." Daniel and Olivia needed a little break after all the stress of work. My fingers tightened around the pie box I was holding. A little break, funded by my life savings. But I didn't show anger. Instead, I smiled gently and said, "That's lovely. I'm glad they're enjoying themselves." She looked at me for a long moment, expecting bitterness, but found none. And in that silence, I saw something flicker in her eyes, unease. That was when I realized, my calm made them uncomfortable. And that was the first seed of my revenge. Weeks turned into months. Daniel didn't visit, didn't call. But I heard about him, small-town gossip travels faster than the wind. Someone mentioned he'd quit his job. Another said Olivia was posting photos from fancy restaurants while Daniel looked different. Thinner. Tired. Like the shine had worn off. I didn't react. I just kept working quietly, saving little by little. Then one day, I received a letter, not from Daniel, but from his company. It was addressed to me by mistake. Inside was a notice confirming that Daniel had been fired, unauthorized transactions, it said. Apparently, he'd been moving money between accounts, trying to fill the hole he'd dug. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. I should have been angry. But all I felt was sadness. Because I knew he hadn't just lost a job, he'd lost himself. And yet, a small part of me still whispered, "He'll come home." It was almost a year later when he finally did. One rainy evening, I heard a knock on the door. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, soaked to the bone, his eyes tired and distant. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. The confident young man I'd raised was gone, replaced by someone smaller, quieter. "Mom," he said softly. I didn't move. He looked down, then said, "I didn't know where else to go." I stepped aside. "Come in." He sat at the table, staring at his hands. I made tea, poured it into the same chipped mugs we'd used since his childhood. For several minutes, we just sat in silence. Finally, he spoke. "Olivia left," he said. I looked at him. "She took everything, the car, the apartment, the savings. I came home one day and she was gone. I waited." He swallowed hard. "I know what you're thinking. And you're right. I deserve it." His voice cracked. "I took your money, Mom. I thought I'd pay it back. But everything got out of control. Olivia, she said it was for us, that we'd invest it, that we'd make it back double." He looked up, eyes red. And I believed her. The sound of rain against the windows filled the silence. After a long pause, I said quietly, "Daniel, I gave you that money because I trusted you. Not because I needed it back." He looked at me, confused. "You're not angry?" I smiled faintly. Anger doesn't fix broken hearts. It just keeps them from healing. He dropped his face into his hands. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't reach for him. Not yet. Sometimes love isn't about holding on, it's about letting someone feel the weight of what they've done." When he finally looked up, I said, "You've learned what money can buy. Now you need to learn what it can't." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I stood and poured more tea, calm and slow. "You took everything I had, and now you have nothing. Maybe that's life teaching you balance." For the first time, I saw something real in his eyes, shame, yes, but also recognition. He understood. That night, after he went to sleep on the couch, I sat by the window, watching the rain fade into dawn. For years, I'd thought revenge meant punishment. But sitting there, I realized, revenge could also be patience. I didn't need to shout or curse or demand. Life was already teaching Daniel what I never could. My part was simple, to stay quiet, to rebuild, and to wait for the right moment to show him what true wealth really looked like. Because I had something he didn't. I had peace. And soon, I would have purpose. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore, it was moral. He had fallen into greed, I had risen into grace. And in that quiet grace, my plan began to take shape. It wouldn't be cruel. It wouldn't be loud. But it would be unforgettable. The next morning, Daniel woke to the smell of coffee and cinnamon. For a moment, he seemed almost at peace, until he realized where he was. He looked around the small kitchen, the peeling wallpaper, the half-fixed chair by the window, and the sight of me standing there in my old apron. "Morning," I said softly. He blinked, still half asleep. "You still make breakfast this early?" I smiled faintly. Some habits never leave. He sat down slowly. His hands trembled a little when I placed a plate of pancakes before him. For years, that was our Sunday morning ritual. But now the silence between us felt like a stranger sitting at the table. I poured him coffee and said, "Eat. You look tired." He nodded, picking at his food. "I've been sleeping in the car for a few nights," he admitted. "Didn't know where else to go." I didn't answer. I just kept cleaning the counter, humming softly, the same old song my mother used to sing when she didn't want to cry. When I finally turned around, I said, "There's work to be done if you plan on staying here." He looked up, startled. "Work?" "Yes," I said. "If you're under this roof, you'll earn your stay." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off gently. "I don't need apologies, Daniel. I need effort." That was the moment his real lesson began. The next day, I gave him a broom and told him to clean the porch. The boards creaked under his shoes, the paint flaking from neglect. At first, he moved slowly, awkwardly. He wasn't used to labor, he'd lived too long behind computer screens, chasing numbers, deals, and hollow dreams. But as hours passed, his movements steadied. He stopped checking his phone. He stopped sighing. Each day, I gave him something new, repairing the fence, painting the shutters, carrying groceries for Mrs. Turner, trimming the hedge. He never complained. Not once. But I saw the truth in his eyes, he was breaking, quietly. Not from the work itself, but from what it was forcing him to see. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, he stood by the porch rail, looking out at the fields. He said, "You ever think people change, Mom?" I looked at him, my hands still busy folding laundry. "People don't change," I said. "They remember who they are, or they don't." He frowned. "And which one am I?" I met his gaze. "You're still deciding." He nodded slowly. That night, he stayed up late, writing something in a notebook. When I passed by, I saw words scribbled across the page: forgiveness, redemption, rebuilding. He was searching for meaning, trying to rewrite his story. But meaning doesn't come from words, it comes from deeds. And he still had one more lesson to learn. Weeks went by. Daniel started waking before me. He repaired the roof, mowed lawns for neighbors, even volunteered at the church food drive. People began noticing. Mrs. Turner told me, "He's not the same boy who left, Evelyn. There's something different in him now, quieter, softer." I smiled. "He's learning." But I knew better than to think learning meant changing. True change isn't proven by time, it's proven by temptation. And I wanted to see if Daniel had truly changed or if he was just waiting to rise again. So one afternoon, I decided to test him. I told him I needed his help sorting through some old boxes in the attic. Among them was a small tin box, inside it, a few $1,000s in cash. When he opened it, his eyes widened. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "Leftover savings," I said simply. I never trusted banks again. He stared at the money for a long time, and in that silence, I could almost see the thoughts racing through his mind. The same thoughts that once led him astray. Finally, he closed the box and handed it to me. "You should put this somewhere safe," he said quietly. I studied him for a moment. There it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. Not because I doubted him, but because I wanted to see the choice he'd make when no one was watching. I nodded and smiled softly. "I will." That night, I sat on the porch, looking up at the stars, whispering, "Thank you, God. He's finding his way back." The next few months passed in gentle rhythm. We cooked together, cleaned together, even laughed again. He started fixing up the house, repainting, planting new flowers, even repairing the old swing his father built years ago. Every act of care seemed to bring a piece of him back, not the man shaped by greed, but the boy who once built paper airplanes in the living room. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset, he said, "I've been thinking about starting over." "Starting over?" I asked. He nodded. "A business, a small, honest work. Maybe woodworking, maybe something local. Nothing big." I smiled. "That sounds like something worth building." He hesitated, then said, "But I'd need a little help getting started." "Not money, just your blessing." I turned to him, my heart tightening. He'd finally learned. He didn't ask for wealth, only for trust. And that trust, this time, he had to earn. 2 weeks later, he came home with a small box. Inside it was a handcrafted wooden bird. "I made this," he said shyly. "It's not perfect, but it's mine." I ran my fingers over the smooth grain, tears pricking my eyes. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He smiled, a real smile, not the one people wear when they're winning, but the one they wear when they've finally found peace. That was when I knew my revenge was complete. Not the revenge of cruelty, but of correction. Not of pain, but of peace. He'd stolen my savings, and I'd let life steal his illusions. And in return, he'd found something worth far more than money, himself. Months later, on a bright Sunday morning, I visited him at his new workshop, Redemption Woodworks. The sign read. Children ran past carrying little wooden toys he'd carved, and Daniel stood at the counter, laughing, covered in sawdust and light. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Mom. You came." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said. He wiped his hands on a cloth and said, "You remember that jar you used to keep your savings in?" I laughed softly. "Of course." He reached under the counter and pulled out an identical jar, only this one was full. He placed it in my hands. "It's yours." "What is this?" "My repayment," he said. "Every dollar I earn, I put a little aside for you. I don't care if it takes a lifetime. I just want to make things right." For the first time in years, tears spilled freely down my face. I looked at him and said, "You already have." That evening, I returned home, the jar heavy in my hands, the sun painting gold across the horizon. As I placed it back on the same shelf where the old one once sat, I whispered, "Some debts aren't paid in money, they're paid in growth." I sat down on the porch swing, the air soft and quiet. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel broken or betrayed. I felt fulfilled. Because I had one. Not by fighting, but by forgiving. Not by punishing, but by teaching. Daniel had learned the lesson he never expected, that the greatest wealth isn't found in what you take, but in what you give back. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. Months rolled by like quiet waves. Evelyn's days returned to a peaceful rhythm, the soft hum of morning coffee, the creak of her porch swing, the whisper of wind through the pines. For the first time in years, her house didn't feel empty. Daniel's laughter echoed again. The air was filled with the scent of sawdust, cinnamon, and second chances. But life has a way of testing peace. Just when you start believing you've healed, the past finds your doorstep. It happened one gray morning in late autumn. A car pulled up outside, sleek, unfamiliar, far too polished for that old country road. Evelyn's first thought was that Daniel had a customer for his workshop. But when the door opened, her heart froze. It was Olivia, her daughter-in-law. The woman who had once looked her in the eye and said, "You don't understand success, Evelyn. You only understand struggle." And standing right beside her, the last person Evelyn expected, was Margaret, Olivia's mother. Both of them dressed in luxury, carrying that cold, restless confidence of people who'd never known how to kneel before humility. Daniel, inside the house, didn't see them yet. He was in his workshop, sanding a table edge with quiet care. But Evelyn, she stood at the window, motionless. For a moment, she thought of hiding. Of pretending she wasn't home. But she didn't. Because that's not what wise people do. Wise people face what once broke them, calmly, steadily, with eyes that have already cried their tears. She stepped out onto the porch. Her voice was gentle. It's been a while. Olivia blinked, her confidence faltering for the first time. Mrs. Carter. We didn't expect you to be here. I live here, Evelyn said simply. Her tone carried neither bitterness nor welcome, just truth. Margaret cleared her throat. We came to see Daniel. Does he know you're coming? A flicker of discomfort crossed Olivia's face. No. But, we didn't know where else to go. Evelyn studied her closely, the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her voice. They weren't the same women who left with laughter and luggage. They were carrying something else now, loss. Moments later, Daniel appeared at the door. When his eyes met Olivia's, the world seemed to still. He froze, every muscle tight. His voice came out as a whisper. What are you doing here? Olivia looked down. Daniel. I didn't know where to go. He didn't answer. Evelyn stood quietly, her hands folded in front of her apron. This was not her battle to interfere in, but it was her lesson to witness. Finally, Daniel said, Come inside. It's cold. The air in the kitchen felt heavy. Margaret avoided Evelyn's gaze. Olivia clasped her hands, trembling slightly. I'm not here to fight, Olivia began softly. We lost everything, Daniel. The investments, the accounts, even the apartment. My mother's been sick, and I didn't know what else to do. Daniel stared at her. So now you remember me? Tears welled up in her eyes. I deserve that. I do. But please. I didn't come for money. I came for forgiveness. For a moment, silence filled the room, long and weighted. Then Evelyn spoke. Her tone was calm, but her words cut through the air like quiet thunder. Forgiveness isn't given with words. It's earned through change. Olivia turned toward her, voice trembling. Mrs. Carter, I know I hurt you. I know I took part in. You don't owe me an apology, Evelyn interrupted gently. But you owe my son the truth. For the first time, Margaret looked up. Her pride cracked just enough for regret to show. She said, Evelyn, I was wrong. I encouraged her. I thought money would protect her. But it destroyed us all. Evelyn's eyes softened, not with pity, but understanding. We all believe that, once, she said quietly. Until life humbles us. Daniel leaned back, his jaw clenched. You both left me with nothing. Yes, Olivia whispered. And it took losing everything to realize how much that nothing cost. The room fell silent again. Then Evelyn stood, her chair scraping gently against the floor. Daniel, she said softly, I'm going for a walk. Talk to them. But remember, forgiveness isn't weakness. It's wisdom dressed in kindness. She stepped outside, the crisp air wrapping around her like an old shawl. From the porch, she could hear murmurs from inside, soft, broken voices rebuilding something fragile. She looked up at the sky and whispered to herself. This is what real revenge looks like, when your peace outlives their pride. Hours passed. When Daniel finally came out, his eyes were red but clear. She's not the same, Mom, he said quietly. She's lost. Evelyn nodded. We all get lost, son. What matters is whether we stay that way. He looked toward the car where Olivia and Margaret waited. She wants to stay here. Just for a while, until she figures things out. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She stared at the horizon, the fading sun touching the hills like gold dust. Finally, she said, if you let her stay, do it for mercy, not memory. Daniel nodded slowly. That night, Olivia and Margaret slept in the old guest room, the same room where Evelyn's late husband once kept his fishing rods and dusty books. The house, once filled with silence, now carried the sound of three different forms of regret, all learning to breathe under the same roof. Days turned into weeks. Olivia helped around the house, quietly, humbly. She cooked, cleaned, and sometimes sat alone on the porch, watching Daniel work in his shop from afar. There were no arguments. No accusations. Just quiet. One morning, Evelyn found Olivia scrubbing the old porch floor, her hands raw and trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Olivia didn't look up. "Because it's what I should have done years ago." Evelyn crouched beside her. "You can't undo the past, Olivia. You can only outgrow it." Olivia nodded, tears falling onto the wood she was cleaning. "I just want to be someone my son could be proud of," she whispered. That was when Evelyn's heart softened completely. Not because she forgot, but because she saw herself in that broken girl. Pride turned into compassion. "And quietly," she said, "you still can be." That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. He'd been working overtime, a big order from a nearby store. When he entered, the smell of soup and baked bread filled the air. Olivia was in the kitchen, nervous but hopeful. "Dinner's ready," she said softly. He paused, uncertain, then sat down. They ate mostly in silence. But sometimes silence speaks louder than words. When the meal was done, Daniel said, "Thank you." And that simple word carried more forgiveness than any apology ever could. Evelyn watched them from the porch that night, two people trying to rebuild a bridge from the ashes of their mistakes. She whispered to herself, "Sometimes the hardest part of revenge is realizing that forgiveness feels better." A few weeks later, Olivia came to her with a letter. It was addressed to Daniel and Evelyn Carter. Inside was a check, from a small grant program, approving funding for Daniel's workshop expansion. "I applied for it," Olivia said shyly. "It's in his name. He deserves it." Evelyn looked at her with genuine pride. "You've changed," she said softly. Olivia smiled faintly. "No, Mrs. Carter. I'm just finally becoming the person he thought I could be." Winter arrived quietly that year. Snow blanketed the world outside, muffling sound and slowing time. Inside, the Carters' home glowed warm with forgiveness, humility, and a kind of peace that can only be earned through pain. One evening, Evelyn sat by the fire, watching Daniel and Olivia laugh softly as they decorated the tree. Her heart swelled, not with pride, but with gratitude. Because true revenge wasn't about seeing others fall. It was about watching them rise, carrying the lessons of their fall within them. And as the fire crackled softly, Evelyn whispered to herself, "Peace is the longest, sweetest revenge of all." The first snow of December came without warning. Evelyn stood by the window, watching the flakes swirl and fall, turning the world into a field of white silence. In that stillness, she could hear her past, whispering through the wind like old songs she thought she'd forgotten. Daniel and Olivia were asleep. The fire had burned low. She wrapped her shawl tighter and sat down by the window, holding a worn-out photo in her hands. It was her late husband, Robert Carter, smiling beside a young Daniel who couldn't have been more than 10. She traced the edges of the photo with trembling fingers and whispered, "You be proud of him, Robert. He's finally found his way back." The house creaked with the quiet weight of time. Outside, the trees bowed under snow. Inside, the ghosts of memory stirred softly, not haunting her, but keeping her company. In her mind, she returned to a night decades ago. a time when she too had been lost, angry, and desperate to be understood. She remembered the arguments, the financial struggles, the way Robert used to say, "Evelyn, the measure of a family isn't in what it earns, but what it survives." Back then, she hadn't fully understood those words. She thought survival meant keeping the lights on, the bills paid, the pantry full. But now, sitting in that same old house, she realized survival was about keeping your heart open, even when life gave you every reason to close it. She smiled faintly. "You were right," she whispered into the cold air. "It took me a lifetime to learn it, but you were right." The next morning, Daniel found her still awake, sitting in her armchair with a blanket around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep again?" he asked, concern in his voice. Evelyn smiled. "Old bones, old memories." He sat across from her. "You've been thinking about Dad, haven't you?" She nodded. "Always." They sat in silence for a while. Then Evelyn said softly, "Your father believed in people more than they deserved. Sometimes it hurt him. But he never stopped. That was his greatest gift, and his greatest wound." Daniel looked at her, eyes thoughtful. "Guess I inherited the wound part." She reached out and squeezed his hand. "No, son. You inherited the strength. You just had to remember it." Later that day, as Evelyn prepared lunch, she heard Olivia humming softly in the kitchen. A gentle tune, unfamiliar, but warm. "That's beautiful," Evelyn said. Olivia smiled shyly. "My grandmother used to sing it when I was little. She said it was about hope." "Hope," Evelyn murmured. "It's a song life teaches us, note by note." Olivia looked down at her hands. "Mrs. Carter, can I ask you something?" "Of course." How did you do it? Forgive me? After everything I did, after what I let happen." Evelyn set the spoon down and turned toward her. Her eyes, soft, steady, full of quiet wisdom, met Olivia's trembling gaze. "Forgiveness," Evelyn said slowly, "isn't a gift we give others. It's a gift we give ourselves. If I kept hating you, I'd still be your prisoner, even now." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes. "But I don't deserve it." Evelyn smiled faintly. "None of us ever do. That's what makes it grace." That night, Olivia wrote something in her journal Evelyn saw the next morning. She didn't read the whole thing, only the first line. "Forgiveness is when pain finally stops asking for permission to heal." Those words stayed with Evelyn for days. Every time she passed Olivia in the hallway, every time Daniel laughed from the workshop, every time the firelight flickered against the walls, she thought about how far they'd all come. Not from riches to rags or betrayal to peace, but from blindness to sight. A few days later, Daniel called out from the porch. "Mom, you should come see this." She stepped outside, shawl around her shoulders. The world glittered, sunlight striking the snow like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Daniel pointed toward the backyard, where a wooden bench stood freshly carved. Across its backrest, in bold letters, were the words, "Grace restored." "I made it for you," he said softly. "For everything you've done." Evelyn traced the letters with her fingertips. "It's beautiful." He smiled. "I wanted to remind us what this house really stands for. Not the past, but what came after." She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. "That's the best kind of memory, the kind that heals instead of haunts." That evening, Evelyn sat alone on that new bench, watching the sky turn from gold to indigo. Her mind drifted to the days when she'd sit there crying over unpaid bills, unopened letters, and unanswered prayers. Back then, she used to ask why. Now, she understood why. Life doesn't take things from us to be cruel. It takes them to make space for what's meant to stay. She whispered softly, pain was my teacher. Forgiveness was my graduation. But peace, as life had taught her, never stays untouched for long. The next week, a letter arrived, addressed to Evelyn Carter. It was from a law firm. Her breath caught as she unfolded it, words swimming before her eyes. It read, "We regret to inform you that your late husband's former property, the land he co-owned with his business partner, Mr. Clarence Wells, is being repossessed due to unresolved debts from years ago. Please contact us immediately." Her heart sank. The old land. The one Robert used to dream of turning into a community garden, a place for families to grow food and share kindness. Now, someone else wanted to take it away. She folded the letter slowly, her hands trembling. For the first time in years, she felt that old ache of helplessness creeping back in. But then she remembered the woman she used to be, and the one she had become. She placed the letter down and whispered, "No storm lasts forever." That evening, Daniel saw the letter on the table. His eyes widened. "Mom, what is this?" Evelyn sighed softly. "A reminder that peace doesn't mean life stops testing you." He clenched his jaw. "We'll fight it. I'll talk to them. I'll find a way." She smiled faintly. "You don't have to fix everything, son. Some things are meant to unfold their own way." But Daniel couldn't rest. The next morning, he drove to town. He returned hours later, snow dusted on his coat, eyes shining. "Mom," he said breathlessly. "You won't believe this, the property's still under your name. The firm didn't know Robert made a partial payment before he died. We can reclaim it if we just file the documents." Evelyn stared at him, disbelief and relief flooding through her. "How did you?" He smiled. "I remembered what you always said, don't run from storms, learn to stand in them." She reached for his face, her fingers trembling. "Oh, Daniel, you've grown into the man your father dreamed you'd be." That week, Daniel, Olivia, and Evelyn worked side by side, gathering old documents, meeting with the lawyer, filling out forms. And when everything was finally settled, they drove together to see the land. It was quiet, blanketed in snow, untouched since Robert's death. Evelyn stepped out of the car, her breath visible in the cold air. She stood there for a long moment, her eyes misting over as she whispered, "This is where forgiveness brought us." Daniel turned to her. "What do you want to do with it, Mom?" She smiled, slow, knowing, peaceful. "Let's make it what your father dreamed of. A garden. A place where people can plant something good, and watch it grow." Weeks later, they began. The snow melted, and the ground softened under the first touch of spring. Neighbors came to help, some out of kindness, some out of curiosity. They planted seeds, built fences, painted signs. And right at the entrance, Daniel placed a wooden board. It read, "Carter's Haven, where grace grows." Evelyn stood there, sunlight warming her face, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She whispered, "Forgiveness is the seed. Love is the rain. And peace is the harvest." The land came alive that spring. What had once been frozen earth now shimmered under sunlight, a field of wild promise. Evelyn stood at the edge, her shawl fluttering in the breeze, watching Daniel drive wooden stakes into the ground while Olivia painted little signs for each row of seedlings. They worked from morning until dusk, their hands stained with soil, their faces glowing with quiet pride. Children from the neighborhood stopped by to watch, giggling as they helped water the first sprouts. Old neighbors, who had once gossiped or turned away in Evelyn's hardest years, now came bearing coffee, tools, and small words of apology that carried years of meaning. Each day, the garden grew, and with it, something unseen began to heal. One afternoon, Evelyn found herself sitting under the oak tree at the corner of the field. It was the same spot where Robert once told her his dream. A place where people remember that kindness still grows, even after loss. Now, she was watching it come true. The air was filled with the laughter of children, the sound of shovels, the scent of new life. And yet, even in that peace, Evelyn felt something quietly approaching. Like a shadow she could sense but not see. A few days later, Olivia came rushing to her side. "Mrs. Carter," she said breathlessly, "Daniel's been coughing all morning. He says it's nothing, but he looks pale." Evelyn's smile faltered. "He's been working too hard," she murmured. "Tell him to rest. I'll make some soup." But by evening, Daniel's fever had worsened. Evelyn sat by his bedside, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. His breathing was shallow, his skin warm and slick with sweat. "Mom," he whispered weakly, "I'm fine, it's just a cold." Evelyn's voice trembled. "You said that when you were 10, and I stayed up all night with you then too." "Some things never change." He smiled faintly. "You never stop worrying." "And you never stop giving me reasons to," she replied softly. Days passed, and Daniel's fever only climbed. The doctor came, a kind old man who had treated Evelyn years ago. He examined Daniel carefully, then looked at Evelyn with a heaviness in his eyes. "It's pneumonia," he said. "He's strong, but he'll need rest and care. His lungs are weak from overwork. No more late nights at the garden for now." Evelyn nodded, though her heart sank. She sat by her son day after day, reading to him from the Bible, from old letters, from books Robert used to love. At night, she'd sit in silence, listening to the ticking clock and the sound of Daniel's uneven breathing, a fragile rhythm that kept her heart captive. Meanwhile, Olivia managed the garden with quiet determination. She gathered volunteers, kept the children laughing, tended every sprout as if it were part of her own redemption. One evening, she brought Evelyn a small vase of daisies from the garden. "They're for hope," she said gently. "You told me once that flowers grow where faith is planted." Evelyn smiled through weary eyes. "Then maybe it's time to believe again." As the weeks went on, Daniel began to recover. Slowly, the color returned to his cheeks, his strength to his hands. By late summer, he was back on his feet, a little thinner, a little quieter, but full of life again. The garden had grown beyond their dreams. Rows of tomatoes, corn, sunflowers, and herbs filled the air with scent and song. Local families came daily to harvest, share stories, and sit by the oak tree where Evelyn often told them, "This garden isn't about food. It's about second chances." That's when the news came. A reporter from the Greenville Gazette had heard about Carter's Haven, the garden started by an elderly widow and her once estranged son. He wanted to write a feature. Evelyn hesitated at first, but Daniel encouraged her. "Mom, your story could inspire others," he said. "Maybe more people will start their own gardens." So, she agreed. When the article was published, something unexpected happened. Letters began arriving, dozens of them. People wrote from other towns, other states. Some sent donations, others simply wrote words like, "Your story made me call my mother again. I was angry for years. But you helped me remember love. Thank you for showing me forgiveness is strength." Evelyn read each one with trembling hands. She kept them in a wooden box by her bedside, her letters of grace, as she called them. But life, in its strange symmetry, wasn't done testing her yet. One morning in late September, while Daniel was working near the tool shed, the sound of sirens broke through the calm. A nearby house had caught fire, an old wooden home belonging to a widow named Mrs. Holbrook, who lived alone. By the time they reached her, smoke was pouring out the windows. "Someone's still inside," a neighbor shouted. Daniel didn't hesitate. He ran straight into the flames. "Daniel!" Evelyn screamed. "No." Time seemed to stop. The sound of fire, the smell of smoke, the blur of people shouting, it all folded into one long, endless second. Minutes later, Daniel stumbled out carrying Mrs. Holbrook in his arms, coughing violently, his face streaked with soot. The crowd cheered as firefighters rushed to help. Evelyn ran to him, clutching his face. "You foolish, beautiful boy," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're just like your father." He smiled weakly. "Guess bravery runs in the family." That night, as he rested, Evelyn sat by his bedside once more, this time not out of fear, but gratitude. She watched him sleep, his hand resting on hers, and she thought of all the ways love had come full circle. Robert had once built a home. Daniel had rebuilt a bond. And she had built a garden. Each of them had left something that grew. The following week, when the first autumn leaves began to fall, Evelyn called the neighborhood together. She stood at the garden gate, her voice carrying softly in the cool air. "This place," she said, "was born out of loss. But it taught me something I wish I'd known long ago. That every ending is just life's way of making room for a beginning." She looked around, at the families, the children, Olivia, and Daniel. "Grace doesn't come when we deserve it," she continued. "It comes when we finally stop running from who we are. And forgiveness is what makes the soil fertile for everything good that follows." The crowd was silent, moved. Then someone began to clap. Others joined in. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn didn't shy away from the sound of being seen. Later that evening, after everyone had left, she sat alone under the oak tree once more. The garden glowed under lantern light, golden, peaceful, alive. Olivia approached quietly, placing a small wooden sign in the soil beside her. It read, "Planted by love. Grown by grace." Evelyn touched it gently, smiling. Then she whispered to the wind, "Robert, we did it. Your dream lives on." The breeze rustled the leaves, soft and low, almost like a reply. In the distance, Daniel's laughter echoed, Olivia's voice followed, and the stars appeared one by one. Each one, a reminder that even in darkness, light has its place. Evelyn closed her eyes and let the sound of their voices wash over her. It wasn't just peace she felt. It was redemption, the rare, quiet kind that only arrives when the heart has done all its growing. The first frost of October came early that year. Evelyn woke to find the garden glistening under a thin veil of silver. The air was still, sharp, and beautiful in its quiet warning that change was near. She wrapped her shawl tighter, stepping onto the porch with a cup of tea. From the field, she could see Daniel and Olivia covering the plants, working side by side like a rhythm she'd waited her whole life to witness. For months now, peace had filled the Carter home, laughter in the evenings, shared meals, a sense of belonging Evelyn once believed she'd lost forever. But sometimes, she'd catch herself standing at the window, watching the horizon, feeling that same old ache in her chest, the one that whispered, "Nothing stays untouched for long." By late November, The story of Carter's Haven had spread far beyond Greenville. A non-profit group from Chicago reached out, offering a partnership. They wanted to replicate the model across multiple cities, community gardens inspired by Evelyn's story. Daniel was ecstatic. "Mom, do you realize what this means? Your name, your idea, could help thousands of people." But Evelyn hesitated. She knew opportunity had a price. And she'd paid too many prices in her life to take one lightly. "Daniel," she said gently, "promise me something. Promise me you'll never let this turn into what money can ruin." He smiled. "You worry too much. And you dream too fast," she replied, smiling sadly. A week later, representatives from the nonprofit arrived, polished, polite, and persuasive. They praised the beauty of the place, the warmth of the community, the marketing potential of Evelyn's image. That word, marketing, made her flinch. When they left, Daniel couldn't contain his excitement. "They want to feature us in a national campaign. They're offering funding, real funding, Mom. We could expand to 3 towns next year." Evelyn's eyes fell to the letter in his hands, stamped with a bold corporate logo. "You think this is help," she said softly. "But sometimes help has hooks." He frowned. "You're being cynical." She smiled faintly. "I'm being old. That's all." Despite her reservations, plans began. Cameras arrived. Interviews were filmed. People she didn't know began showing up, asking questions, snapping photos. Evelyn felt her peace thinning, like fabric stretched too far. The garden still bloomed, but something sacred was quietly fading. The silence, the heart, the humility that had made it real. One afternoon, as she walked through the field, she overheard 2 men from the nonprofit talking. "We'll put her name on it for the first phase. After that, we rebrand, shift focus to the donors." Her breath caught. She stood frozen behind the corn rows, listening as the truth unfolded. They wanted her garden, her story, her name. But not her. That night, she sat by the oak tree, alone under a cold, indifferent sky. Her heart felt heavy, not with anger, but with the weight of déjà vu. Once again, people she trusted were trying to take what she had built with love. The storm was returning. The next morning, she gathered Daniel and Olivia in the kitchen. The air smelled of coffee and quiet tension. "Sit down," she said calmly. "We need to talk." Daniel looked up from his papers. "Mom, if this is about the partnership again." "It's about more than that," she interrupted gently. "I overheard them yesterday. They're planning to replace your name after the first phase." "This isn't a partnership, Daniel. It's a takeover." Olivia's eyes widened. "What?" "But they said." "I know what they said," Evelyn replied. "But words are easy. Integrity isn't." Daniel stood abruptly, frustrated. "You're being paranoid. These people believe in us. You just can't let go of control." Her voice stayed calm but firm. "Control isn't the same as care. And I won't let your father's dream become someone else's product." He turned away, his jaw tight. "Mom, this could change everything." "It already did," she said softly. "And not for the better." That night, a storm rolled in, heavy rain, thunder that shook the house, wind that howled through the trees. Evelyn sat by the window, watching the sky tear open. She thought of Robert, how he used to say storms reveal what's strong enough to stand. Maybe this was one of those storms. Sometime after midnight, she heard a car door slam. She peered outside. Daniel's truck was gone. The next morning, he still hadn't returned. When Daniel came home, His face was pale, his hands trembling. He dropped a file on the table, wet from the rain, edges crumpled. "I went to them," he said quietly. "I saw the contracts, Mom. You were right. They already filed paperwork, without telling us." Evelyn said nothing. She only reached for his hand. "I was so blind," he whispered. "I almost sold your story." She smiled gently. "You can't sell what isn't yours to give, son. It belongs to the people who found hope here." He lowered his head, shame and relief tangled together. "I'll fix this," he said. "No," she replied softly. "We'll fix this." The next week, they called for a town meeting in the garden. Neighbors gathered under the oak tree, the same spot where Evelyn's journey had begun years ago. She stood before them, her gray hair glistening under lantern light, her voice steady as the earth beneath her feet. "Friends," she began, "some of you know that outsiders came offering us a deal. They spoke of growth, of fame, of opportunity. But growth means nothing if it costs the roots." The crowd murmured in agreement. Evelyn continued, her eyes shining. "This garden was never meant to be owned. It was meant to be shared. Every flower here carries a story of loss, forgiveness, and love. No company can own that." Daniel stepped forward, his voice clear. "My mother's right. I made a mistake. I thought success meant recognition. But she reminded me, the real success is the peace you can live with." A hush fell over the crowd. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the air. The non-profit representatives, standing near the gate, realized they were defeated, not by anger, but by something far stronger: integrity. That winter, Carter's Haven remained humble but alive. No expansion. No cameras. No corporate signs. Just a garden, and a family that had learned what true wealth meant. Evelyn spent her mornings teaching children how to plant seeds, telling them stories about patience and kindness. Her voice carried wisdom, but her laughter, soft, genuine, was the sound of peace reclaimed. Daniel often joined her, working silently beside her, his eyes full of gratitude he no longer needed to say aloud. Olivia, ever gentle, began documenting their story not for fame, but for memory. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Evelyn sat beneath the oak tree once more. She looked out over the land, golden under the fading light, and whispered, "We weathered the storm, Robert." Again. A gust of wind swept through the branches, scattering leaves across the soil. They landed softly, like blessings. For a moment, Evelyn closed her eyes and listened, not to the noise of the world, but to the heartbeat of the earth itself. Everything she had lost had led her here. Everything she had forgiven had allowed her to stay. And in that stillness, she understood something she never had before. Revenge gives a moment of satisfaction. But forgiveness gives a lifetime of peace. As the stars began to appear, she rose slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried far. Love always wins, but only after it's been tested. Winter settled gently over Greenville that year. Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes, as if time itself had decided to move more tenderly for a while. The garden lay under a soft blanket of white, sleeping it alive, waiting for spring's quiet promise. Evelyn stood by the window, holding her mug between trembling hands. Her reflection in the glass looked older now, softer somehow, almost translucent, like she was fading into the light she had tended for so long. And she was at peace with that. Daniel and Olivia had taken over much of the daily work. Children still came to help, laughter still filled the garden's air, even in winter, when they shoveled paths through the snow to visit the oak tree. The sign that read "Planted by Love. Grown by Grace," now hung above the gate, its paint weathered but its meaning eternal. One evening, Evelyn sat at her writing desk, the same desk Robert once built for her. She opened a blank page and began writing a letter. Her handwriting was shaky but graceful, each stroke deliberate. My dear Daniel. If you are reading this, it means I am somewhere quieter than this world, but still watching, still proud. She paused, smiled faintly, and continued. I once believed revenge could mend what was broken inside me. I thought pain could be balanced by seeing those who hurt me hurt in return. But time, Daniel, time taught me better. What heals us isn't justice, it's understanding. What frees us isn't pride, it's humility. And what gives life meaning isn't success, it's the love we leave behind. Tears dotted the paper, but she didn't wipe them away. They were part of the letter now. When I go, promise me this, keep the garden open. Let every person who walks through that gate feel seen, even if they've been invisible to the world. Let it be a place where broken hearts rest and begin again. And please, forgive quickly, love loudly, and remember, kindness always finds its way home. She folded the letter neatly, sealed it in an envelope, and wrote on it. For Daniel and Olivia, when the first rose blooms again. As the months passed, winter deepened. Evelyn's health grew fragile, not from illness, but from time itself whispering that it was ready to take her hand. She still walked the garden each morning, leaning on her cane, humming softly to the sleeping plants. Daniel often joined her, matching her slow pace. Mom, he said one morning, you should rest more. She smiled. The garden rests enough for both of us. He laughed. You never change. I hope not, she replied. Change is for seasons, not for hearts. One cold February night, she dreamed of Robert again. He stood by the oak tree, bathed in golden light. You kept the promise, he said. You turned pain into a home for others. Evelyn reached for him. I'm tired, Robert. I know, he said gently. But look what you've grown. You can rest now. When she woke, the world was still, the kind of stillness that feels sacred, not empty. She smiled, knowing what the dream meant. Daniel found her the next morning, sitting peacefully in her chair by the window, a faint smile on her lips, the sunrise painting her in gold. The teacup beside her was still warm. He called her name softly, but the quiet answered for her. For a moment, he just stood there, frozen between grief and awe, then he knelt and took her hand. Olivia came in, tears already falling. Together, they sat with her, holding the silence like a fragile gift. Outside, a single red rose had bloomed, out of season, bright against the snow. Olivia saw it first and whispered, Daniel, the rose. It's blooming. He looked at the letter on the desk, the one marked, when the first rose blooms again. His hands shook as he opened it. They read it together, her words wrapping around them like a warm blanket in the cold. When they finished, neither spoke. They just held each other and cried. A week later, the town gathered in the garden for Evelyn Carter's memorial. There were no black suits, no sorrowful speeches, just stories, laughter, and songs she loved. People brought flowers, not for mourning, but for planting. Daniel spoke last. My mother taught me that every broken thing still has a purpose, he said. She showed me that forgiveness is not weakness, it's the strongest seed you can plant. If she were here, she'd probably tell me to stop crying and go water something. The crowd laughed softly. Then, together, they planted an apple tree at the heart of the garden, Evelyn's tree. A plaque beneath it read, In loving memory of Evelyn Carter, she taught us how to grow grace. Time moved gently through Greenville. Carter's Haven became a sanctuary not just for plants, but for people. Schools brought children to learn there. Veterans found peace there. Strangers became friends over coffee and soil. Daniel and Olivia had a daughter. They named her Eve. Every spring, Eve ran through the garden barefoot, her laughter echoing like bells. One day, when she was 7, she tugged on Daniel's sleeve and asked, "Daddy, who planted all this?" Daniel smiled, his eyes glistening. "Your grandma, sweetheart. She believed love grows where it's planted." "Then we should plant more," Eve said, running off with a handful of seeds. Daniel watched her, smiling through tears. "She already is," he whispered.